Hello guys, and welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Wang Guan, sitting in for Liu Xin. In this series, we dissect stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to our guests to compensate for the missing pieces of the puzzle. So join us in real time by sending us your comments or suggestions or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or Weibo. If you're watching this live on the CGTN app, email us at thepointwithalex@cgtn.com. Let us know what you think. That's important. We air Headline Buster on Fridays at 11 a.m. Beijing time. So get in touch with us, and we just might read out your comments. Before we get to today's topic, that is COVID-19 vaccination rates, let's look at some comments on the issue from our viewers. Now, Blackthorn said, "There's nothing that made me happier than to see all countries succeed in the fight against the virus. The quicker it is done, the quicker we can start traveling again." Man, I miss the days when I can travel to a tropical beach resort. So I very much agree with what you said. Church Stevens said, "There are countries that don't understand that commitment of a responsible and capable government with a disciplined population of great culture. The massive amount of efforts and resources that have been mobilized is ongoing." Man, I really agree with what you said. I think about last year when the whole city of Beijing, Wuhan, the whole country is mobilized, to really combat this virus. It took a village. Now, Lying Blue said this: "Public sector takes the risk, private companies take the profits. And let's not forget, you cannot sue them if it goes wrong." Really? I think there are legal means where, you can sue them or file a complaint. Anyhow, today, we're looking at the vaccination rate amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Almost a year and a half since the COVID-19 outbreak started, countries are counting on vaccines as an effective way to stop the coronavirus from spreading. Here are the figures. More than 1.7 billion vaccine doses have been administered worldwide. That is equal to around 23 doses for every 100 people on this earth. However, vaccine inequality poses a major risk to recovery. In his opening remarks at the virtual 74th World Health Assembly, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres acknowledged what he called the tsunami of suffering triggered by the pandemic. Here's what he said.
Over 3.4 million lives have been lost. Some 500 million jobs have gone. Trillions of dollars have been wiped from global balance sheets. The most vulnerable are suffering most, and I fear this is far from over.
He also warned against what he calls a two-speed global response, in which rich countries vaccinate the majority of their people, while the virus continues to cause deep suffering by circling and mutating in the poorest countries. His message was clear. COVID-19 cannot be beaten one country at a time. Now, Director General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, echoed that idea in his remarks, saying, "The pandemic is not over, and it will not be until and unless transmission is controlled in every last country." He also said this, listen.
"A small group of countries that make and buy the majority of the world's vaccines control the fate of the rest of the world."
Now, to put that in perspective, he said more than 75% of all vaccines have been administered in just 10 countries. The messages are loud and clear. Vaccines are the most effective way to end the pandemic so far, and vaccine inequality is huge. Now, when it comes to China and China's vaccination rate, what are some of the global media saying? Well, they have been largely focusing on one thing and one thing alone, that is China's vaccination rate. When vaccination efforts were starting around the world, the media were essentially saying China's vaccination rate was low. These articles, for example, were published in just April and saying just that. But really, it depends on how you look at it. As of May 2021, China has actually administered the highest number of doses. As of May 25th, 2021, almost 547 million doses have been administered. In the US, that figure is half of that, at around 288 million. Now, even though on a per capita level, countries such as Israel, Britain, Mongolia, and Canada take the lead. This is, of course, due to the fact that China's population of 1.4 billion is a lot higher than, say, the 9 million living in Israel. But here are some questions that are also important. What factors determine the country's vaccination rate? For countries who have vaccines, how are they incentivizing their citizens to take them? Here's what the head of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Gao Fu, said about some of these issues in an interview with my colleague, Zhou Yue.
China, at the moment, we have done the best because of the so-called NPI, non-pharmaceutical interventions. So because you don't see any patients or any cases, even asymptomatic infections, you think you are safe because this is the first time for the people, for the human beings, to use the COVID-19 or general coronavirus vaccine. So there are people still worried about the safety behind.
Now, Mr. Inpu, a psychologist, believes that the perceived lack of a threat, the lack of fear, is what drives people to say no or not yet to getting a vaccine here in China. Here's how he put it.
The decision actually involved two things. One is rational decision. The other one is emotional decision. Those rational thinkers, they look at the numbers. Say, well, over the last year in China, this has pretty much been under control. And there are a few dozen cases, and the closest one is 1,000 miles away from me. So what is the point? But there are vast majority of people actually make emotional decisions because emotional decisions are quicker. You know, you don't need to have all the data and all the information. You don't have to understand everything. So go back 12 months, had the vaccine been available then, the decision would be simple because I'm scared. Okay, and this can protect me, it can calm me down. Great, I'll get it. In China, you know, both of these decisions, you know, may lead people to think, hey, I don't need it right now.
Now, as we speak, China's vaccination rate has continued to attract attention in the global media. Here's a recent headline from CNN saying with 100 million inoculations in just 9 days, a fresh batch of COVID cases finally helped China combat vaccine hesitancy. This piece picked up on the uptick in the number of Chinese people getting vaccinated, saying Chinese authorities announced the first 100 million people had been vaccinated on March the 27th. After that, it took another 26 days to reach the 200 million mark, and then 17 days to hit 300 million. The Wall Street Journal went a step further and explained how China did it, saying, with motivation low, China's neighborhood committees, companies, and schools have been deputized to bring vaccines to people rather than wait for them to sign up. Community workers and residential compound managers are calling people and knocking on doors, showing older people how to book slots on their mobile phones, handing out fact sheets, setting up information stalls, and answering questions from those who remain hesitant. A dozen people said they had been asked multiple times by their building management or their workplace to sign up for a vaccine. Now, this kind of persistence to get their citizens vaccinated may seem annoying to some, but many believe this is what it takes to bring COVID under control. But this is not the sense that you're getting from some media reports like this piece on Newsweek, titled China Forcing People to Take Vaccines Against Their Wishes. The article quotes a few complaints posted on Chinese social media site Weibo about concerns over people feeling pressured to get vaccinated. But the article only focuses on a few isolated cases, not the bigger picture that has been given by other media to illustrate the Chinese government's efforts to boost the vaccination rate, just as many other governments are doing. Now, more and more people get vaccinated around the world. That is a fact, and it is a race against time, if you think about it. But fresh concerns are arising too. As China vaccinates more of its citizens, does that mean that there will be fewer vaccines available from China sent to overseas to give other countries combating worse outbreaks with fewer resources? How to resolve vaccine inequality around the world? What about the efficacy of Chinese vaccines? Now, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk to our guests about these issues. Stay tuned. Guys, welcome back to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Wang Guan, sitting in for Liu Xin. Today we've been talking about China's vaccination campaign and really vaccine inequality around the world, and why is it so important to resolve these issues. And we have with us a cutting-edge group of experts, panelists, to talk about these issues. They are Professor Zhiwei from Center for Public Health Research, Medical School of Nanjing University. Eric Ding is a senior fellow from the Federation of American Scientists. Dr. Chen Hong is with East China Normal University. And Dr. Naoko Kumada is a faculty member from Asian Studies and Anthropology at Bard College in New York. Thank you so much for all of you joining us today. Dr. Chen, what's behind China's uptick in the number of its citizens getting vaccinated?
I think actually vaccination is very important at this critical time for the whole world, in particular, of course, in this case, for China to combat the disease. Because actually China had a very tough year last year, nationwide with, the first effort to put the disease, the pandemic in control. And then, of course, to sort of like, quenching, scenarios, with resurgences of the outbreak, here and there, but definitely, have been, controlling the whole situation. But later, obviously, we need to bear in mind that actually the pandemic is still there, the virus is still there, and of course, the virus respects no borders. So the best way, of course, is to ensure that actually there is this kind of group. I won't use herd immunity, but actually a group immunity that has been achieved in the population, nationwide. That is actually, I think, the incentive or the motivation that actually China is actually having this uptick to have this vaccination, rollouts. Of course, there are hesitancies. People are having second thoughts about, the efficacy or even, about the side effects of the vaccination. But of course, time again, statistics and facts and proof that actually the Chinese vaccine has been, very, safe and also efficacious, and that actually is actually what ensures actually this kind of, very effective way to, ensure the success of the vaccination rollouts.
Right. We'll talk about the questions revolving, the efficacy of Chinese vaccines later. But Professor Wu, I get asked this question a lot. But I want to ask you, how necessary do you think it is for China to vaccinate the majority of its citizens? Because if you think about it, the COVID-19 has been largely put under control here in China.
Well, actually, that's very critical, because if you look at the countries around China, the COVID-19 is still rampaging, and in some countries are still out of control. I think that's one of the issues that we need to vaccinate in a relatively short time to build up a herd immunity. Because if you are starting open borders, even without opening borders, actually the imported cases remaining coming, and you do see a sporadic surge in the new infections. So I think that's why it is desperate, in our society, trying to build up sufficient immunized people. And so that's one of the key reasons why the country is now trying to vaccinate about 80% of the population by end of this year. And I think the other thing is that we started, increasing the vaccine production capacity as well. So I think overall it's going pretty well. You have seen just in the earlier reports that we started immunizing people, about 10 million people one day, basically continued for about now 10 days. So I think the immunization program will speed up further.
Right. Dr. Kumada, as a scholar based in America, give us your sense of how do you think China has been coping with COVID-19 outbreak and its vaccination campaign?
Well, I think that China has been doing great. It's one of the successful examples in the world. Countries like China and Vietnam, and as a Southeast Asian, I would also like to point out Cambodia, Laos. Those are the countries that have been very successful in combating the coronavirus, and have living in the US because of political reasons. Very often I cannot raise my voice, but I often envy people in Asia, Southeast Asia, China, about the situation there. I hear that people are already going out. Well, recent return of the variant is a different, a new development, but China has largely controlled the virus, and the US isn't there yet. We had 600,000 over deaths, and the vaccine has been rolled out, but only about half of the adult population has been vaccinated, and we are far from having won this battle. And now, even though America is the country that has stocked up the vaccines, we don't know how long the effect is going to last. That's where we are right now. So we are already talking about perhaps needing a third shot. So yes, there are many things that are unpredictable, and it's not just the vaccine itself, it's how the society can act in solidarity. And unfortunately, America is a very individualistic society and divided society. Race is a huge issue. So there are so many issues that I think lies ahead in America.
Yeah, Eric, I mean, we've heard from the UN Secretary General saying that no country is safe until all is safe. How exactly do you see countries, rich and poor alike, moving in a synchronized manner towards this goal? I mean, in reality, it is easier said than done, no?
Yeah, it's easier to say that we should all share our vaccines, but unfortunately right now, when vaccines are still relatively scarce and not every country has their population vaccinated enough, it's really hard to motivate them right now to share. That's kind of like the political reality at the moment. But I think what they really need to realize is, look at India. India had a surge, and now the Indian origin variant B1617.2 is a variant of concern. It's one of the fastest spreading variants ever identified. It is potentially more dangerous as well to children and many other populations. And now you see it from Singapore to Australia, which is entering a fourth lockdown because of it, to far away distant corners of Canada, and of course every single continent. I think that example tells us, if you do not protect and vaccinate the entire world, the world will develop more variants that will come back and bite you. And UK is having a surge, and UK is one of the most vaccinated countries in the world, but they're seeing hospitalizations on the rise in pockets where the Indian B1617.2 is rising. So that teaches you, just being selfish is not enough. You have to share with the rest of the world and developing countries if you truly want to end this pandemic. And I think ending the selfishness is what will politically motivate everyone and to see sharing is caring, and we are one world.
I mean, Dr. Chen Hong, the figure we've just heard from the earlier report is staggering. Over 75% of the COVID-19 vaccine doses were administered to just 10 countries. How can we resolve this issue of vaccine inequality?
Yeah, I think actually this is a very critical issue about vaccine inequality. The COVAX obviously has been in its function to operate. Well, it has got its their goal to immunize 250 million people in low and middle income countries. So actually this is actually a very important platform. I think actually globally there need to be some kind of a multilateral system or mechanism that should be promoting the distribution, equal distribution of the vaccine. That will actually to be striving to achieve the vaccine equity. As I said, the virus respects no borders. So when the pandemic becomes rampant in one country, especially in a third world country, becomes a threat to the rest of the country. That is when some mechanism like COVAX comes on the stage, and no country is safe, as we said, until the rest of the world is simply safe. So, however, obviously the problem is that the developed countries, as Eric was saying, have been monopolizing an incredulously huge percentage of the vaccines, holding them, wasting them, while the rest of the world painfully awaits for their life-saving supply. So as long as the source of their vaccine supply is monopolized or restricted, it is simply difficult, so if not impossible, to achieve the targets.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Professor Wu, let me turn back to you. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, the chief of the WHO, said that countries, actually companies, manufacturers of COVID-19 vaccines, many of them have not shared their licenses, their IP, their technology and know-how. It is important for them to do so to ensure the quality and equitable distribution of vaccines. Do you agree?
Yes, I definitely agree with that point. But I think beyond the production and the licensing and the patented rights, but there are basically, I think the key issue is the political will. That's why the WHO the assembly actually had a meeting. The political leaders have to sit down and work out a formula and a mechanism how to distribute and how to supply the vaccines to COVAX program. I think COVAX program is a wonderful idea by basically guarding to having a so-called equitable distribution of the vaccines. But so far, one of the problems is that it doesn't have sufficient vaccines to distribute. Its goal actually is limited by the vaccine production capacity and vaccine supplies as well. I think this is now we are in a critical moment right now. In some countries, the COVID-19 is going down. In other countries, it's still going up and the spreading. So it's a very critical that the countries would have a political will to supply sufficient vaccine to the COVAX program. So the COVAX actually could, using its own mechanism to supply the vaccines to the needy countries. That's the initial goal of COVAX, and that's actually it's the key mechanism how we could pull down this COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, we have about 3-4 minutes left. I really want to get this question to all of you, starting with Eric. How effective do you think Chinese vaccines really are? Because there has been a whole lot of critics out there questioning the efficacy of Chinese vaccines.
Well, I think the Chinese vaccines, Sinopharm, Sinovac, they are pretty efficacious. They range in many studies in the 70s and 80%. There's some studies that show it's lower in the 50s, but I think context is king. In those that show, Sinovac 50%, it was in Brazil in the height of its pandemic and with new variants, while the same vaccine in Turkey was 88%. It really depends on the context of the variants and the infection volume. And also, I want to point out that the U.S. is not entirely all profit-driven. President Biden pushed for the TRIPS waiver to waive the vaccine patents and tech transfer. So I think there is a growing movement of making sure that vaccines are readily available, and the U.S. ramping up production for the rest of the world as well. But I think the different vaccines, they all have different advantages and I think different contexts of storage, of efficacy. But I think the best vaccine is the one that we can get deployed as fast as possible. So right now, the world needs any of the vaccines.
Dr. Chen Hong, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree that actually the vaccination at this moment is being rolled out, and time again, around the world we have been receiving reports and to testify that the efficacy and also the safety of the Chinese vaccine. I think actually the people here in China are actually getting increasing confidence in the China-made vaccines, and that actually will be also contributing to the immunity of the population in China, which will also contribute to the global success against the COVID-19 pandemic.
Professor Wu, the efficacy of Chinese vaccines.
Yeah, I agree. The advocacy actually is pretty good so far. As more and more data are coming out, actually, I think we are pretty confident that the Chinese vaccine are quite efficacious, particularly in preventing severe diseases and hospitalizations. They have, they have shown tremendous effect in controlling the hospitalization and the death. So clearly that the vaccine works. The other thing is that the Chinese vaccine offer an additional advantage is that it doesn't require that stringent storage and logistic conditions. So this is particularly suitable for developing countries because you don't have to build up new supply lines. So it's this is actually the key in controlling the pandemic. That's we are desperately trying to supply the vaccine to the needy population.
Dr. Kumada, what do you think?
Sorry, about the Chinese vaccine?
Yes, please.
Yes, yes. It seems to be showing that it's very effective, and I think that it is crucial that the issue doesn't get politicized. The problem right now is that it's become a little bit like 5G. Which side are you on? Which one are you going to take? It's the issue has. Are you going to use our system, our vaccine, or the the American Western one or the Chinese one? And the issue has become politicized, geopoliticized, and weaponized. So I think that we need to overcome that. Chinese vaccine is effective, and we shouldn't politicize the issue.
All right, you know what? We have some comments from our viewers who are watching this live stream. I just want to show you one of their comments, if my colleagues can kindly project that to the big screen. Okay, this friend, Gardenholic Chabi, excuse my pronunciation there. He or she said, I live in France. I got vaccinated with AstraZeneca. I have family in 5 different countries. My sister got vaccinated with Sputnik 5. A cousin living in the USA got Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and some nephews got Sinovac. Everybody is fine. You know what? This is great news. Thank you for your comment. We wish all the health and happiness to you and your family. That would do it, actually, for this edition of the Headline Buster. Thank you so very much, Professor Wu Zhiwei, Eric Ding, Dr. Chen Hong, and Dr. Naoko Kumada. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. And that would do it for this edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing, sitting in for Liu Xian. Until next time, I will see you again.